I don't want to
Listen,
talk to
I-
you,
You need to
okay?
talk with her, because you're
No,
acting a little.
no.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this interesting meeting. Steve Young and I, we met recently, and I've been following Steve's posts, and Steve has been very inspiring. He's a health expert. I wrote Health Expert Master Supreme on many levels. And when we had a recent discussion, it really blew me away. The depth, the nuance, the granular dive that he's done on all realms of health, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, the amazing work he's doing with unique technologies to expand consciousness, to up level ourselves at a whole new level of health. Well, I used to think health. After this talk, you're going to understand it in a much higher dimension. But saying health master is one thing. This is really a true warrior, a sage, a man of great wisdom, great intellect, great insight. And so I'd like to welcome you, Steve, to our gathering today. Thanks for being here, brother.
Yeah, super excited to join this call. Always super happy to share, what I've learned in this path of health. I've sort of explored, learned, embodied, and taught in the last 20 years.
Please tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and how you came there, please.
Yeah. So like most people who embark on any journey, I feel like that first reason and that first motivation is self-directed, right? And so for me, I was a very unhealthy child. I was pretty much unsupervised, single parent, worked like 80 hours. So as any unsupervised child would do, I basically ate like Oreo cookies all day and played video games for like
Really?
20 hours straight. Oh yeah, for sure.
I can't even imagine that.
Like literally 20 hours straight of Super Mario Brothers and Zelda on the Nintendo system while eating Oreo cookies. And so you can imagine doing that for prolonged periods of time, you are not going to be the healthiest human. And so I had horrible allergies, acne. I remember probably the moment that really got me to be like, I really want to be healthy is the mile run fitness test that kids do when they're in school. I got lapped, right? So literally, I was so slow and so out of shape. This actually girl lapped me, and I was like, all right, there's probably a good time to kind of switch things around. And so when I was 14, just started to read anything on health. In fact, really the first book was Psycho-Cybernetics. It was actually programming the subconscious mind. And
Really?
somehow I had this aha in that moment that the key to health and well-being wasn't, tips and tricks. It was like, how are you thinking, right? Like, what's the thought process? Actually, I remember the exact thoughts I had was, there's no difference between like Bill Gates and Martin Luther King. They were the two names that came into my mind. I know Bill Gates is not a big fan right now, people with them, but back then, Bill Gates and Martin Luther King, like no difference between them and me. They just thought differently. And so to read about the subconscious and about health and fitness and nutrition, and that just kind of embarked me on a journey of following magical breadcrumbs. So I got degrees in fitness and got degrees in biomechanics, and eventually that led me to the fitness world. But I kind of realized something in me was like, I want to do more than just helping people get fit, and so that's when I started to transition from fitness to healing. And so I went and got degrees, master's and doctorate in physical therapy. And so my first entry into healing was from a physical perspective. And so I've been doing that for 20 years. And along that way, my wife was diagnosed with an incurable disease 14 years ago, so ulcerative colitis. And because I did something at Penn State, which is a whole side story, I met someone coincidentally, and I reached out to him when she was diagnosed, and in 6 weeks, she was cured. Yeah, like no medications, no relapse. It's been 14 years. And so that really opened my eyes as to, during that time, I was like, how is this so easy? Like, how come she went through the traditional medical route and they were like, you must stay on meds for the rest of your life? And she was so sick at one point, she was hospitalized for a week, right? And so couldn't hold food. And I was like, how is this such a discrepancy between like traditional medicine is, and I was part of traditional medicine, right? So I'm a physical therapist. I work within the system, and that was really what pulled me out of the system, at least my consciousness, into looking into, wow, what's possible outside of the system. And so for the last 14 years, I've been on that journey. And so now, realizing that it's much more than just looking at the mechanical body, right? We look at the mind, we look at the energy, we look at the person's environment, and of course, we look at the people's biology. And so in the last 2.5 years, we started doing, we've been testing a lot of entrepreneurs and people in our friends circles who would come to these very deep dive experience retreats that we have. And we've collected enough data about them through those 5 realities. We found some commonalities. Like, so all people have imbalances in X, Y, and Z. And so we're now building this app that gets people to take the actions to resolve those things. And the goal is to gift this to humanity. And so essentially what it does, it causes behavioral change and permanent behavior change in people so they can actually achieve their highest level of health.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. So you've had such an extensive journey in this whole dimension, working with your wife, working with yourself. You're obviously a very fit, healthy individual. I'd like to know, what do you know, working with the people that you see, what are the number one concerns or health challenges or, you know, the biggest contraction points that you see as a general, you know, if there can be? Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Great question. And so what's really interesting is I always like to set a frame before I answer a question, right? And so know that when people are coming to us with, I call it the label, right? So some doctor typically will say, you have blank. And that could be diabetes, it could be high blood pressure, it could be obesity, it could be anything, right? All the labels. What we found is that on one half of reality are the symptoms and the labels. The other half is our innate ability to heal. And medicine, traditional medicine, only looks at the symptoms and really doesn't look at how do we maximize healing, right? And so what we do is we just go, well, if we can maximize your ability to heal and adapt as much as possible, no matter what's on this side, it essentially resolves, right? So I'll start with that frame.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, and so, but typically the most common things that we see would be things like anxiety, stress, depression, hypertension, right? Because keep in mind that our network of people we brought on board into our world of healing has mostly so far been entrepreneurs. They tend to be a little bit busier than the average masses, right?
And so they're running things in their mind all the time. They're usually full on, 24/7. Usually hard to shut off the mind when you go home.
All that.
Okay.
All that, right? So those are the most common things.
A-type Yang personalities of movie,
and you were very spot on. A lot of this, and they've almost learned through practice to disconnect, right, from this, right? Because they've relied mostly on this to get ahead, right? And so a lot of the work that we do essentially is getting them to.
You've got to be in your head to get ahead.
Exactly, right? I mean, we could do a whole talk on language for sure. Yeah, and so we do a lot of things for them to get them to integrate everything. And so, so I would say that the most common thing, if we had to, without using traditional labels such as high blood pressure and all that stuff, if I had to put it into a category, it essentially is the disconnect from head to their heart, right? So in that category is probably the biggest. Yeah.
You know, in the warrior wisdom traditions, we have 3 centers of wisdom: the mind, the head, the thought dimension, the mind dimension. We have our heart, the love, the connection, and we also have the belly, the gut. Sometimes the heart and the gut are seen as one, tacit, visceral, if you will, message center, communication center, a seat of wisdom, whether we divide it into 2 or 1. Can you share more about that, and why have we become so separate?
Sure. Yeah. My theory on it is this. I always tell people this example. Do you remember a time where when you were young, right, as a kid, where you sat there, you may have like stared off into space, you were just imagining things, right? You were sort of in your world. Was there a time where when that was happening, did one of your parents come over and say, hey, little Johnny or little Susie, you're doing such a great job just being, right? Did that actually happen to any human?
It's so
Right?
rare, right? We're getting kudos and acknowledgement for successfully fulfilling some task or some
Yes.
obligation.
Yes, right. And so the first time that you smiled, I'm sure some parent was like, "Oh my God!" The first time we walked, the first time we did something, right? Basically, the reward, if we wouldn't use biological terms for all the science, like the dopamine release came when we accomplished something. It wasn't from being a certain way. And so, from a very, very young child, if we stick to um, human existence, because this is bypassing like multi dimensions and souls and all that stuff, right? If we just stick to biological existence, my theory is that conditioning essentially leads our brains. It's like programming us to saying our every worth or every who we are is tied to what we do, right? Which is why a lot of times when the masses ask kids, they don't say who do you want to be when you grow up? They do what do you want to be when you grow up? So it shows up in our language. Yeah. And so
Wow.
there's this hyper attachment to doing and what, which is the logical mind. Then typically there's a lack of practice of separating or integrating really the entire system. So
Say the part again, who we are.
yeah, so the question, right, which is, you mean like the question in terms of what we ask, like we don't ask kids, who do you want to be? We ask them what they want to be, right?
Wow.
And a typical answer is a doctor, a lawyer, some profession, right? And this is all, I believe, very on purpose, right? This is very, because it's like, there's too many examples of this happening for this to be arbitrary when I've looked at the
Tell us more
power of
about that.
language.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think, when you look into it, just like the medical system, most people don't realize our Western medical system is completely structured, influenced by Rockefeller, right? Most people don't realize this. In 1910, prior to 1910, there were multiple different medical schools, right? There was a school for homeopathy, there was a school for energy medicine, there was a school for electrical, vibrational medicine, and of course there was, your biological school. And so in 1910, when Carnegie paid someone to go to the medical schools to assess what's happening, the report came out and it shut down 90% of the medical colleges, and the 10% remaining, Rockefeller spent $100 million in 1910 money, which is a lot of money these days, to put
Wow.
his team on the boards of these medical colleges, right? And so this is just a public information, it's right on Wikipedia. This is not like conspiracy theory, right? This is just what has happened. If you look into it, this is where some people say, well, Steve, that's conspiracy theory. But the facts are, back then when drugs were invented, many of those drugs were petroleum based, right? So it's very profitable for the Rockefellers to say, let's skew medicine to practice this way, because they made money whenever someone saw a doctor, right? And so why else would any company spend $100 million in, that would almost be like, I don't know, probably $100 billion.
That's got to be more than a billion from
Yeah,
1910, maybe
1910.
10
Yeah,
billion at least.
it's a lot of money, right? And so they would not do that if they weren't a benefit for them somehow.
So the
Right?
skew was made back then right away
Yeah,
to make those particular forms of medicine be the standard, while the other ones were repressed or even taken
yeah.
off.
They wiped out all the other medicines basically, right? And so,
Because
and,
back then there was all types of energy medicine, rife
all
medicine,
kinds,
there
all
was
kinds.
radionics and many
Yes,
different things like that. Okay.
yeah. And even back then, there was actually, shamanic healing was actually a very popular thing back then, right? And so, all herbal medicine, all wiped out. And so, if we tie that to what we just talked about, which is language and control, our school system, right? Some people think, actually, the masses think our school system in general was a bunch of smart educators who wanted enlightened children came together and created school systems. No, it was designed by factory owners to make very obedient factory workers, right? And so what's yes, right?
But
And
I
so
saw pre-1910, late 1800 exams I found online a few years
mhm,
back,
mhm,
grade 11, 12. And it's what we would consider university level nowadays. So
yes,
much more advanced,
yes,
so much more thought development, so much more developing the thinking capacity, the discerning capacity, the mental and emotional intelligence, which basically got wiped out for the purpose of making a good worker
yep,
within the uh, industrial complex.
yeah, yeah. And so when you are able to understand this, it allows the masses to think of this stuff and let go of the words such as, wow, this is crazy, this is weird, this is insane. I've actually written some stuff about how those words shut down learning. But when you start to understand where things come from, then you have this amazing framework to then take that framework and kind of develop more in-depth thoughts and just basically putting structure behind things so you can actually understand it. And so I believe it's very helpful to understand where all those things came from. And of course, look at things like mass media, right? Most mass media outlets, like the newspapers, TV stations, stuff, it's owned by like a handful of companies, right? They full control over the dissemination of words. And so if that is the case, then is it likely that our words that we use are carefully crafted and perpetuated by those that control information? I believe the answer is yes, right? And I've seen too many examples of words that are not serving for the masses everywhere for it just to be by accident. So
Those who flag, oh, conspiracy theory. The way I look at it is in these particular circumstances, these facts that you've shared about is all publicly available,
yeah,
and all of that. I don't see it as a cabal that's trying to
no,
take us into some evil dimension.
mm-mm.
I look at it as more of a capitalistic advantage.
Yeah,
But with your heart closed, with
yeah,
being your pocketbook, being the primary motivation, not the upliftment and the health of people and humanity. And I think that whole skew is why we have a lot of what we have today.
yes,
I grew up just like you were sharing. My mother's side are all physicians.
mm,
And so very early on, I was very pushed to become a doctor. And when that wasn't going to happen, they said, okay, be a lawyer, be this. And when that wasn't going to happen, it was going to be something else. Now my parents are very supportive, very, very supportive of all that I do. But it was a journey
yeah,
coming from a traditional East Indian family,
yeah,
Asian family, where high education is valuable. You're
mm-hmm.
considered someone of note, someone of repute. You have status in society. And so much of our orientations and our motives that I've seen of people in these circumstances, in these levels of education, they aren't necessarily based from their own motive, their own desire to be in that profession.
Yes,
It comes from family and societal pressures and honing, if you will.
yes.
So where are we at now? What do we do with where do we go from here?
Yeah, yeah. And it's so spot on. Yeah, so many people. I was just talking earlier to my 11-year-old daughter who her best friend literally lives across the street. And they were talking about how she was talking about how her friend wants to be a forensic scientist. And she's like, it's kind of weird because she's like, well, my friend doesn't like any of the sciences, doesn't like math, doesn't like any of that stuff. But then she drops a comment such as something along the lines of when my daughter told her friend that my daughter wants to be like an artist and like a baker, her mom, the friend's mom, was like, you can't make any money doing that. So you must be doing this to make money, right? And so it's very interesting how I wonder how much of the to be a forensic scientist is the child's idea versus what the parents like, no, that's a great profession, a great thing to do to make the money because somehow money equals some kind of something, right? So I explained to my daughter, like, money is great. It has its energy. It's just energy that's completely separate from freedom, from security, from all the other stuff that people attach to money. And so what you alluded to earlier is yes, the there's no evil cabal. There's just people who have attached so many things to money, and they feel like that is so important. It has skewed their, their choices basically in a way that doesn't serve humanity the most. But they truly believe they're doing it the best way. I feel like the recent like Marvel movies do a great job of illustrating this, right? Like, if you watch any of the Avengers movies, like the main evil villain Thanos believes the best way to save the universe is to kill half the universe, right? He's not doing it just to be evil. He's not doing it just to be whatever. He actually truly believes that is the best solution, for the universe, right? And so, yeah, I don't believe there's evil people. I think they just have their choices, their ways that may not be the most serving for the masses from the masses perspective. So,
and you know what? There's accusations and if you will, pointing to that we have our own Thanoses right now from Avengers. We are interested in reducing the population, culling the population. From a meta disposition, it might be good. It might sound crazy to kill half the population and all that. But when you're at a certain level where you're not amongst the everyday people of life, and you're not in the thick of everyday living and struggle and relationships and life, and people going to the grocery store and going to the movies, it's very easy step by step to erode your human connection and be self-deluded, thinking that your meta choices are good for the whole, but it's coming from a fundamental disconnection of reality to everyday people. And I don't believe we can actually have a healthy society until everyone in society of all various degrees of financial success, of societal standard, are in the reality of what everyone is going through.
Yes.
And so you see people every day in their body. I've been a body worker for many years in my early years.
Yeah.
I was a shiatsu therapist, acupuncturist. And so I worked many years in the body. And I got to tell you, the humility I got, in fact, I became a pregnancy specialist in my 20s.
Okay.
I was working with many women. One woman would come to me pregnant, and then she sent 3 friends, and they sent a few friends. And before I knew it, my shiatsu center was filled with pregnant women. And here I am, a kung fu.
Right.
Very masculine, not knowing how to deal with any feminine energy. And I had a crash course. But I gained a lot of my humanity and appreciation for humanness, brought me down to earth. And I believe that healers of this day have to come back from seeing people as physiological entities alone.
Yeah. Sure.
As bodies, minds, and spirits, all as one being.
Yeah.
Please share more about that from your perspective.
Yeah, there was a time, so when I first saw the curing of an incurable illness 14 years ago, of course the logical step at that point was, how do I change healthcare, right? How do I get the other doctors to see things a different way? And I actually went down that path for about 8 years, right? And so I used to lecture to health professionals, fitness trainers, some doctors who are willing to listen about this other way. So, but what I realized is that doesn't work. Ma, 我在讲话，妈。
Oh, you're on mute now. You're on mute.
Unmute.
But we all heard you talking to Ma or whoever.
I was like, hey, I'm on the call. So so I went down that path, and what I realized was that to change that system, to help the practitioners actually learn this other way, they had to like unlearn what they learned to get there. And so recently I've realized it's actually easier if we just give people the power directly, right? And so in other words, it's actually less steps too. I'm also a huge fan of less steps. Instead of like, people are seeking health, they go to the doctor for health or some type of practitioner, and then they deliver the health. If we just give people directly the power to be healthy, it's just less steps, and there's a lot less re-education, right? Because if the doctors have to relearn things, then they have to be masters at helping their patients relearn things for all this to work anyway. So we figured it's actually just easier just to get directly people to relearn. So, yeah.
My friend, people are listening here, and I'm sure people are inspired here to up level who they are, what they are. What are some, give us some foundational starting places. Where can we start? Here I am, I'm in poor health, I'm in good health, I'm in optimum, I'm in good health. Where are we, and how can you give us some insight on expanding where we're at?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I'll do is I'll just go through our, in the company that I have called Immortal, we've kind of created this amazing framework that people can use. Yeah,
Immortal.
Immortal. Yeah, so it's a play on words. So
Love it.
immortal with one N is just a being that has always existed and that will always exist, suggesting God. The company is actually two M's, Ammortal. So it's basically it's a play on words. It's mortal, which is men, mortal within a mortal, right? So it's, in other words, just God within all of us. So it's like a divine essence
Love
within
it.
all of us. Yeah,
Love
yeah.
it.
And so in that company, we created this framework, right? Because I'm a huge fan of frameworks, because without them, things can be a little bit too many dots. And so the framework that we use essentially is looking at a human from all five perspectives. When I say human, I am it's beyond the physical form, right? I can also use mind, body, spirit from all five realities. So one reality would be the mind, right? And so for anyone that is watching and listening, the language as regards to the mind, the number one variable that affects people's minds adversely in their lives and their health is stress, right? And so in the language, people will say things like, how do we reduce stress? I'm under stress. How do we eliminate stress? What's fascinating is, again, our mass media language is, I think, carefully crafted to only discuss at the vibration and the reality of symptoms only, right? Because if you think about it, we can talk all day about reducing stress, or we can talk about how do we frame reality? How do we create the story and see and perceive what's happening so there is no stress,
Yes.
right? That
Rather
makes,
than deal with the surface tension of the result of our skewed way, or if you will, impoverished way of consciousness,
yes,
if we're looking at it from a whole new, we're not even generating the stress in the first place.
yes, yes. That's a much more fruitful place to put your attention to, right? So I just worded it as root cause versus symptoms, right? And so many of the mass media language is actually directing us to look at symptoms, right? Every diagnosis, people don't realize this, every medical diagnosis is a diagnosis of symptoms. It is not the root cause, right? The root cause is completely hidden in medicine, which is why if anyone listening, I want to start this grassroots movement where when you go to your doctor and they label you something, you ask them, what's the root cause of this? They're going to say, we don't know. And I believe that if enough patients ask doctors, what's the root cause? And they keep saying, I don't know, they wake up, they pull themselves out of the matrix and say, wait, something's going on. How come we don't know the root cause of anything? Right. And so from a mind perspective, if we circle back, it's the ability to create and choose a story of your situation, your experience in a way that does not even lead to stress, right? And so that's from a mind perspective, probably the greatest practice. Another easy one would be body, right? Our bodies are meant to be in rhythmic motion, right? It does not like to be still for prolonged periods of time, right? And so anyone listening, want to make sure you incorporate some type of rhythmic motion into your movement, practice choice, right? And so from an environment perspective, everything in our environment actually affects our system, right? And so the workstation, right? Someone's working on a computer. If you can create your environment where there's some type of motion versus completely being still, and even worse, completely forward right now, and so that profound effects on health, and even your how your house is set up or your office is set up. Be very mindful of where things are placed. Can you create your environment that actually promotes movement, right? Promotes openness. And the Asians were really into environment. They call it feng shui, right? Just placement of and location and setup of things directly affects us in every which way, right? So that entire study is powerful. And so that's environment. And then you can look at it from an energy perspective, right?
So
So from
mind,
yep,
body, and then environment.
environment, yep. and now we're going to energy, right? So from an energy perspective, we can go very scientific, right? Vibration, energy is just vibration. And so vibration could simply be Wi-Fi waves, right? At night, shut down your Wi-Fi. Like if you're not using your Wi-Fi waves, you have less of that vibrational frequency going to your body. And people may not realize that there's studies showing that Wi-Fi waves is actually affecting us genetically, epigenetically. It's actually turning on genes that do not serve us, right?
Interesting.
So yeah. And so that's from a very science vibrational perspective. When we get to the other side of it, I'm sure you know, and many listeners know, that our every thought and emotion is controlling our vibration of our molecules.
Yes.
Right. And so from that perspective, one, if listeners don't know this and viewers don't know this, know that the vibration directly dictates us in every which way. In fact, of the 5 realities, energy or vibration is the most powerful, right? Because it controls everything downstream. And so be very mindful of every thought, right? Every emotion that we choose, because the mass media language suggests we don't have choice, right? Think about this. How many times do people say, you make me feel blank, that makes me feel blank, versus I'm feeling blank because, which is very different.
Yes.
Subtle but powerful, right?
Yes.
So one is an internal choice, I feel blank, because of external.
And it's an internal responsibility.
Yes, right.
One
versus
is externally projecting onto whatever circumstance or individual is the root cause or the cause of your disharmony and upset. And so we blame, shame, project, get angry at them, which Buddha said ultimately destroys ourselves.
Yes.
The real anger that we have is actually more self-destructive to ourselves than any vehemency or vitriol or projection or shouting will do for them.
Yeah,
It might
absolutely.
cut down in a short term, mentally or emotionally or verbally, but we're really cutting down ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. Right. And so the mastery over revamping our words is powerful, right? Because to me, I look at it as an analogy I use is we're like since I play a lot of video games. And so we're like a video game character inside the video game. And the moment we, started this game, we were tricked into thinking we're just a player, but we're also the programmer, right? It'd be silly to come into this world knowing we're the programmer, because essentially that means we would already know every move of this game and we wouldn't play the game. It would be boring. And so that is hidden from us. Only interestingly, as you play this game, you eventually realize, oh yeah, we're also the coder, right? And so in the code are our thoughts, right? Our thoughts and our emotions are adding to the code. It's this constant feedback loop. And so if that's the case, then really our thoughts and emotions are basically dictating reality. And some people will use words like manifest, right? That is a symptom of the root thing that's happening, which is we're literally controlling reality with our thoughts and emotions, right? So all that gets lumped under energy, right? Because it's in that vibrational code space. And so I think when people
your internal languaging is paramount to the vibrational state you're in.
Absolutely.
That's
absolutely
essence, is what I'm getting through all your sharing here.
Yeah.
And so is it valid to start looking at and researching how we are using language to uplift or to contract us?
Yeah. I think language is such a not talked about tool that's powerful.
I believe I've lost your sound again. No, you're on mute.
Okay.
There we go.
I'm basically telling my family members to be a little bit more quiet. So so language is, I believe, the most underrated, powerful tool that we have for everything, right? And I talk about this all the time. We have English class, right, in school, but that's simply how, it's like grammar, right? It's like remembering words and grammar. It does not teach us the power of our language in the control of our reality. that's a whole different process. But you know, I've learned language. You know, you learn how to properly put things grammatically together, right? But not the power of every single vibration of every word. And that's one of the most powerful things that people can start to observe their own words. I've known people. I mean, I've worked with people where just by listening to some of them talk for a couple of minutes, you can almost see, you can experience the themes within their words. So things like, oh, this hit me. I had to wrestle that down. I was under this stress. Like it's such a vibration of like under attack,
Combat,
right? And
war.
combat, right? And so then they go, wow, my life is really difficult right now. Things are always coming at me. And like, because your language is actually programming source code to be like, you know, this is what I want. And you know, the analogy I give to people is like reality is like Facebook in a way, right? Facebook's tracking every split second of every image we're ever watching as we scroll, and it just gives you more of what you're stopping at. That's like reality. Whatever you're vibrating at, it will just give you more of that. But you have a choice. You can scroll really fast through, or you can stop. And if you stop at something, it just gives you more of that.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
If we look at the ancient traditions, we look at even the Bible, it says the word, the original word, the word was made law. You know, the word came into form.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the Upanishads or you look at the Vedantas, it says Om, or the original word is the word of God, the word, the sound. My spiritual teacher, Hakim, he would say that truth is in the sound.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear many people say things, but if you're listening to the sound, you can tell, where is it accessing? Is it from mind? Is it made up? Is it manipulative?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's great orators who can manipulate many people when they're unconscious and not aware that they're being emotionally evoked into some type of joining some bandwagon, to be adhering to their system or their party or whatever, right? But
Yes.
to truly be free, all these mentors and teachers of mine, Hakim actually had studied, he was in Egypt and he's passed now, but he had studied about 10 languages.
Wow.
And we would talking and speaking, and he would share the word origins of each different word, where we would stop and go, do you know that you were asleep with that?
Wow.
So one of them is like the word understanding.
Mm.
You're under
Mm-hmm.
standing up.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't understand that even the words in law are written in a very unique way that has its own legalese, but even lawyers aren't taught the deeper meaning, and sometimes they're right in front of us.
Yes.
So blatant, but because we've used them so often, if we say the same name, even
Yeah.
our own name over and over for 10 minutes,
Yeah.
it'll sound like a sound reverberation.
Yes.
So like the term television,
Mm-hmm.
someone is telling you a vision.
Mm-hmm.
The word
Yes.
TV programming, they're telling you, here's the program.
Yeah.
What's in the TV program guide today? I remember growing up, we had a TV guide, TV program guide.
Yes.
It's telling you that they're programming you.
Yes.
And if you're volitionally accepting that as face value and you're recrafting or going numb or dull with its meaning, then by tacit acceptance, you're saying yes to that thought form manifesting as your reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine if the 7 days together was called strong.
Yes.
Is it interesting? I ask people, do our brains know it's W-E-E-K versus W-E-A-K? It's the same sound, right? So yeah, it's very interesting for sure. It's so in front of us sometimes, like, oh wait, yeah, it's everywhere. Like, and I joke to people like, who wants to tire again? Like retire, right? So when people, right? So yeah, like I rather like re-thrive, right? Versus retire.
Steve, you should put out a booklet on this, or a book on what you have found in the realm of language. It's fascinating.
It is, yeah, it is. And once I stumbled upon this, it just started to question every word that yeah, I'm a whole, I can send it to you. I have a whole language thing of like some words that we think through how it serves us or may not serve us. Yeah, it's powerful. I think it's like
your process that you take people through to help them educate, to wake up to the power of their inner languaging.
It is. I find that even if someone is not open to the energetic, multidimensional spiritual world, people get language. It becomes a very common tool and useful tool So it just becomes it's almost like it's such a prevalent tool. We're just getting people to switch the use of the tool, whereas sometimes getting people to embrace some of the more higher level things, it's a tool they've never used before, so they're kind of uncomfortable with it. So I feel like starting at language becomes a very common and accepting way for people to start to indirectly anyway control their consciousness, right? Just using a more simple tool. It's a great starting point, basically, for sure.
And it's a great awakening spot. It's a place to say, okay, I'm going to consciously choose to start awakening, being more present to, more alive to, more present to the use of what used to be automatic. I'm going to bring into consciousness.
Yeah.
And when we bring it into conscious self-reflection, that just even the practice of waking up in our everyday use of language, desiring to audit, if you will, what's coming out of yourself. In my experience, this is a mirror reality.
Sure.
This is a total three-dimensional mirror reality, as you said, to the transmission, the emanation. It's a big yodel in return, bouncing off a big mountain, which is the universe. And what we're experiencing now is the return of our vibrational transmission of being, if you will.
Absolutely.
Take us down that road. I'd like you to share more about your spiritual understanding and your viewpoints around that and the whole being, the health of the whole being.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Feel free to go as wide out as you want. We've got a very cool audience here, Warrior Sage, very cool group. We're open to all views. So.
Okay, yeah, great. It's great to have that freedom to go as wide as possible, for sure. I will say that before we get to that, to close the last loop, the fifth thing is biological, which is the most common, right? People, when think about their health and wellness and all those things, most people go right to biological. So we don't have to spend really much time on that. It's just, taking care of your nutrients, eating healthy foods and all that stuff. So I'll close that loop. We'll go into the amazing rabbit hole of what you just asked. So I think there's so many layers to what actually reality is. I've spoken to some people. I don't know. Have you heard of Panache Desai?
I've heard of him. I've seen him in online videos. Yes.
Yeah. So he's amazing at the understanding of this, because he has actually experienced all 33 layers of reality, right? I don't know too many people who have actually, I know people who read about it and people who may even speak about it, but he actually has experienced all 33 layers of reality. And so I have it for sure, right? And so I will speak from a understanding, like a knowing perspective, but definitely not from I've actually experienced it, embodied, and lived this, right? And so caveat. So my take on it is absolutely our reality is not what it seems to be, right? So I gave one way to look at it is we're in a video game and we're also the coder. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is I think we're in a layer of reality where people talk about oneness and they talk about 3D or duality, right? And so I believe that we get to choose to see things through duality, and that's a great way to put things in boxes for us to collect data, right? We're collecting data because when we label things with words, right? This is hot and this is cold. We're putting things in boxes, and we get to experience this duality, which has its purpose because it helps us with the knowing part of it. And then we get to switch to oneness where there's no hot and cold, right? It's everything is as is. And in that reality, we get to fully embody it into all of our essence, right? Beyond our body. And so my take on reality simply is we have that choice. And so we can exist in that dualistic reality, and we get to, in moments, choose to see and experience and feel the world through oneness. And I actually like playing with those two different frames in different situations, different realities, because, and what's really interesting, even going between the two in itself gives us additional data. So that's how I see, and that's how I experience life in terms of what's happening. I can tell you personally, I have gone through some of these exercises and have felt shifts in life now that then immediately brought me visions of previous lives. If we use timeline words, previous lives completely shifting. Or if we don't use timeline words in quantum mechanics, because there's no time, we'll just say many other variations of the now I was able to see in my mind's eye shifted because of a shift I made in this reality or this dimension that I have experienced, right? And so all kinds of things are possible. And I believe that is not even scratching the surface of what's possible and what is reality for sure.
We are in this time now. Many people in this circle, this Warrior Sage circle, many people have already awoken or in the midst of awakening, in the process of awakening, or multi-dimensional reality. The idea of a formed self within this body mind has been questioned. In recent times, Dr. Deepak Chopra, bringing the wisdoms of the East from 30, 40 years ago, the onslaught, a slew of Eastern mystical teachers, expanding our viewpoints of what the soul is, where it is, our infinite self, the magical traditions coming from underground or coming back out into the surface after years of repression. So I believe more and more in the mainstream, the understanding of multiple dimensions, multiple realities, infinite selves is becoming more prevalent. But it can be very far out until you start having real experiences of this. Now, one of our foundational trainings in Warrior Sage is a set of teachings from a Russian author named Vadim Zeland.
Okay.
And the book series is called Reality Transurfing.
Okay.
I don't have it in front of me here, but Reality Transurfing. And it's an exact step-by-step guide to learning how to see yourself and experience yourself as a multi-dimensional being that's appearing in infinite realities. And the idea is that you're not manifesting realities. What you're doing is you're transferring the loci of your consciousness into a reality which is vibrationally equivalent to what your dreams are rather than your automaticities.
Yes.
And so it's an exact profound guide on how to do that. I've been teaching this and training this with all my CEOs. Their companies are going 10x, their lives, their sex lives, their health, their vitality, their relationships with family, blue, because my experience is, and it's not a belief anymore. For me, it's a real experience that there's infinite realities right out of this moment. And it's my awareness of my awakeness. And so one of the fundamental practices is in any moment in the middle of the day is to just stop before you're about to initiate something, about to get on a call, get off a call, have lunch. Anytime there's a initiation of something, you're about to walk through the door, go to the bathroom, pick up a phone call. You say, I am awake. I am awake. You notice the I that's awake. And then you say, and then you become aware of reality. I'm aware of reality. I'm awake. I'm aware of reality. And it's finding that center point of the sense of self and the sense of reality. And that becomes the up periscope place where you periscope like a submarine outside of this fixed reality, see yourself as an infinite creator. And then you move into the corresponding realities. You generate the reality that you want to walk into. Now, no matter how metaphysically interesting that sounds, the application of this is remarkable because what happens is then you pull those realities to you rather than having to use excessive willpower. It's like Taoism on steroids.
Awesome.
And so this is the exact same parallel teaching. And I believe it's not in one place. It's popping up everywhere around the world. And you've expressed it so beautifully in your way. But I really enjoy and love the comprehension, the comprehensiveness of your approach to these 5 dimensions: mind, body, environment, energy, and biological, correct?
Yeah, those are the 5. Yeah, because what we found is that ultimately we want people to transition in their own journey to get to what you just spoke about. What we find is that it can be difficult when they're being almost suppressed, right? And it can be suppressed through any one or usually a combination of those 5 realities, right? For example, if someone, you look at America, they tested a bunch of average Americans, and we know the lowest, like if you're really healthy and you're eating organic and you're really on top of your health, you're going to have about 300 industrial chemicals in your blood. If you're not paying attention, you can have closer to 700 industrial chemicals in your blood. That's the range. And so if you combine that with, they also tested a bunch of average Americans, they found 93% of Americans have Roundup in their blood. And everyone, 100% of every person we've ever tested has Roundup in their blood.
That's the Monsanto spray, right?
The weed killer that we now know, if you look at research, not only is it, of course, cancerous, it basically disrupts your gut, which then changes the bacteria, which then changes the neurotransmitters, the brain chemicals that go up to your brain because of the vagus nerve. And so if you combine that with the toxins, it's almost like your brain. It's very interesting if you notice. I actually just saw a graph the other day on the exponential rise in zombie movies in the last like 10 years. We're literally seeing the zombification of brains when we test people, right? We have a device that we can use to assess all the 5 main regions of the brain, how well they're functioning. 95% of the people we test have dysfunction in one and sometimes all 5 regions, right? So when we start to see that, from interacting with them, I can feel and sense and see they're having a harder time transitioning to this spiritual realm because they're literally, their brain is being suppressed. It's as if we'll forget if it's on purpose or not. We'll just say the brains are definitely being suppressed, right? And so through this approach, we found out, hey, if we can unblock these suppressions from all the 5 realities, and the app that we're building, which is fascinating. So we're very mindful of the language, the color, even the way they're swiping and moving and how the sacred geometry things are coming together. We're actually brainwashing people to be awake. We're not telling them. They're actually learning it subconsciously. The conscious
unbrainwashing, waking up.
Exactly, right? And so the conscious thing is, oh, use this to get healthy. What they don't realize is actually, our internal dialogue with the team is we're getting them to the divine table, right? For someone to be at a divine table, 1, they have to realize they're divine, and 2, to be at a table with other divine beings. Yes. That's where a lot of magic happens. So,
my friend, we've gone all around the world, inside and out. This has been remarkable. Your shares have been very helpful, inspiring to me, and I'm sure inspiring to many here. How can we get a hold of you, find out about your services?
Yeah. I think for now, I have still a brick and mortar business. I'm in New Jersey right now, where we do the healing stuff, but probably the best place right now would be just Immortals. It's AMMORTAL.com. Through that website. And right now, there's very limited information on there, but in the next coming months, as we're launching the app and launching so many things we worked on in the last 2.5 years, there'll be a lot of information and ways to reach out to me, basically.
Fantastic. To complete today, what's in your heart to share, please?
Yeah. If I had a takeaway message, a lot of times when I speak about these things, it seems like there's a lot of data, right? A lot of stuff. And sometimes people will ask a question such as, well, how do I, what should I do? And so my usual recommendation is, if you just center, focus on breath, and just ask, hey, what's the one thing that I can implement and integrate that is the most serving of me? That answer comes. Yeah. And so I'm a huge fan of practicing ease. And so that path of ease in which you're using to get to wherever you want to get to, in this case would be maybe health. We talked a lot about health and stuff. So using that path of ease to get there can be very helpful.
Thank you so much for such an enriching share, being who you are, transmitting your own congruence. That to me is worth more than anything. That it allows me to trust you, and who you are is what's really making the impact. And so, my friends, please, let's take into good advice what Steve has shared with us today, and let's up-level ourselves as multidimensional beings. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Be well, everyone. Thank you so much.